The crisp mountain air smelling sharply of pine and damp earth was the first thing Elias Thorne truly noticed. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, recirculated air of the countless sound studios that had defined his life for nearly 4 decades. Here atop Whisper Ridge in the secluded Summit Creek, estates of Colorado, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the subtle symphony of nature, the sigh of wind through towering firs, the distant chatter of a mountain stream, the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. This mountain sanctuary was their reward, the culmination of a lifetime spent chasing deadlines and crafting sonic landscapes for Hollywood's biggest spectacles. Elias, a man whose meticulous nature had earned him 2 Academy Award nominations in sound design, finally felt the tightly wound spring within him begin to unwind. He ran a hand over the smooth, hand-hewn log walls of their new timber cabin, a masterpiece crafted with evident care. It sat nestled on 3 acres of pristine land, offering unobstructed views of Silent Peak, its rugged face changing moods with the shifting alpine light. Inside, a massive stone fireplace stood as the heart of the home, its construction a testament to patient craftsmanship. Every window seemed perfectly placed to capture the dawn's first blush or the fiery spectacle of sunset. After years spent in darkened rooms, perfecting the roar of explosions and the whine of bullets, Elias craved light and quiet. His wife Clara found her solace outdoors. Her gentle spirit, often tested by the chronic pain of fibromyalgia that seemed to worsen with stress, found immediate connection with the raised garden beds flanking the cabin. They were empty now, awaiting the spring thaw, but Clara could already envision them overflowing with herbs and vibrant blooms. "This is where I'll heal Eli," she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion the day they moved in. For her, this healing journey wasn't just about escaping the city. It was about reclaiming her strength in a place that felt nurturing and fundamentally peaceful. They were finally finding peace, a tangible thing they could breathe and touch. The Summit Creek Estates Homeowners Association seemed initially refreshingly low-key. Elias, ever diligent, had scrutinized the covenants before they bought. The rules focused primarily on practicalities, road maintenance, waste disposal, preserving the rustic aesthetic. There was no hint of aggressive development plans, no clauses suggesting their airspace could be violated or their hard-won tranquility compromised. It appeared to be a community of like-minded souls, retirees, vacation homeowners, who valued the serene natural beauty as much as they did. In the weeks that followed their arrival, Elias began converting a small outbuilding into his personal workshop. Not for deadlines or demanding directors, but for his passion project, restoring vintage audio equipment, turntables, reel-to-reel machines, vacuum tube amplifiers, pieces of history he could coax back to life with patient hands. It was the perfect blend of his technical skill and his newfound desire for quiet contemplation. As he organized his tools and breathed in the scent of sawdust and solder, watching Clara planting her garden through the window, Elias felt a profound sense of contentment. This was it. Their retirement dream finally realized. The world outside, with its noise and demands, felt a lifetime away. The first sign of disruption arrived, not with a bang, but with the purr of an expensive European SUV navigating the gravel roads of Summit Creek Estates. Evelyn Hayes descended from the driver's seat like a businesswoman stepping onto a stage. Immaculate tailoring, confident stride, a smile that was bright but didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. She had purchased the sprawling property at the ridge's highest point, previously owned by a quiet couple who rarely visited. Her background, whispered among the residents, was in high-end resort development down in Aspen, a world away from the quiet retreat Summit Creek aspired to be. Within weeks, Evelyn was everywhere. She attended the sparsely populated HOA meetings, armed with articulate suggestions and an easy charm that seemed to disarm the mostly older residents. She spoke of maximizing potential, community enhancements, and embracing responsible progress. It wasn't long before she nominated herself for an open board position, winning easily against token opposition. Her energy was infectious, or perhaps just overwhelming for a community accustomed to a slower pace. The shift was subtle at first, a gentle tightening of the reins masked by polished rhetoric about community standards. New architectural review guidelines appeared more detailed and restrictive than before. Suddenly, the color one could paint their trim became a topic of emailed debate, initiated and steered by Evelyn. HOA meeting minutes. Once straightforward summaries became vaguer, Glossing over details of budget discussions, transparency seemed to lessen, replaced by pronouncements from the board increasingly dominated by Evelyn's persuasive voice. Talk of improving property values became more frequent, subtly overshadowing the original emphasis on quiet enjoyment. Elias noticed the changes. He mentioned the new landscaping rules to Clara one evening as they sat by the fireplace. Seems a bit controlling for a place like this. He mused, more puzzled than alarmed. The rules didn't impact their established garden plans or his workshop conversion, so it felt distant, like background noise he could filter out. He saw how some neighbors seemed captivated by Evelyn's dynamic presence, while others simply shrugged, content to let someone else handle the HOA power dynamics as long as the roads were plowed. There was an undercurrent of complacency, a quiet acceptance that perhaps allowed ambition like Evelyn's to take root unnoticed. He filed the observations away, unaware that the subtle shifts were merely the prelude to a storm gathering just over the ridge. The unsettling feeling began subtly, like a low hum, just beneath the threshold of hearing. Elias was returning from a walk along the creek, enjoying the late autumn chill when he saw them 3 wooden stakes topped with bright orange flagging tape, driven firmly into the earth. They formed a stark, unnatural line cutting diagonally across the lower edge of his property, near the grove of aspens. Clara loved. They hadn't been there yesterday. No notice, no explanation, just an alien intrusion into their carefully guarded private property. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Around the same time, the sound of chainsaws echoed from further up the ridge, a harsh grating noise that shattered the mountain quiet. Clara came inside, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "They're cutting down some of the old pines near Miller's Bend. Eli," she said, her voice strained, "the big ones. It feels wrong." The sound visibly agitated her, fraying the edges of the peace she so desperately needed. Elias tried to reassure her, but the image of those orange flags on his own land wouldn't leave him. Was there a connection? This vague sense of unease was growing. His calls to the HOA office yielded nothing but frustratingly polite runarounds. Diane, the part-time assistant who seemed perpetually flustered, claimed to know nothing about survey work. "You'll need to speak with Mrs. Hayes directly about any development plans," she'd mumbled, avoiding a direct answer. But reaching Evelyn proved impossible. Calls went unreturned, emails unanswered. The evasion felt deliberate, a calculated silence that only amplified Elias's growing suspicion. The answer, when it came, felt like a physical blow. It arrived during the next HOA meeting, held on a Tuesday morning when most non-retired residents were likely working. Only 8 homeowners dotted the chairs in the small community lodge. Evelyn Hayes stood at the front, radiating confidence, beside an easel displaying glossy architectural renderings. She spoke enthusiastically about an exciting new amenity, a state-of-the-art chairlift connecting the North Ridge to the South Slope, promising enhanced winter access and a boost to property values. Then she unveiled the planned route. Elias watched his blood running cold as the projected line sliced directly through the center of the renderings, passing squarely over an unmistakable depiction of his own timber cabin, his home, his sanctuary. He could practically see strangers gliding overhead, peering down into their lives. He raised a hand, his voice tight but controlled. "Evelyn, that path crosses directly over my home. I never received any notification about this kind of development." "There's nothing in the covenants allowing this." Evelyn acknowledged him with a smile that didn't warm her eyes. "Actually, Elias," she countered smoothly, sliding a document across the table towards him, pointing to a highlighted section. Section 37, paragraph C, grants easement rights for community improvements. It was clarified in last year's administrative update. Perhaps you missed the correspondence. He knew instantly it was a manipulation, a distortion buried in bureaucratic language. During an update most residents likely hadn't scrutinized. The violation of privacy felt staggering, premeditated. He looked across the room at Clara, who had insisted on coming with him. The color had drained completely from her face, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Their carefully constructed peace had just been shattered by orange flags and a dismissive smile. Armed with plat maps and a copy of the original covenants he'd signed, Elias drove down the mountain to the county planning department. He felt a sliver of hope. Surely regulations existed to prevent such a blatant invasion of privacy and disregard for established property lines. He found Marcus Bellwether, the retired judge who lived further down the ridge, leaving the building as he arrived. Marcus offered a curt nod. "Dealing with the county?" he asked quietly, his gaze sharp. Elias briefly explained the chairlift situation. Marcus frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Be thorough, Mr. Thorne," he advised softly, his tone carrying a hint of warning. "Evelyn Hayes has connections. Her husband's firm does considerable business in this county. Document everything." The meeting itself was a masterclass in bureaucratic deflection. Elias presented his case clearly to the three-person zoning board, outlining the lack of notification, the discrepancy with original HOA guidelines, and the direct impact on his home and Clara's health. He spoke passionately about the right to quiet enjoyment, promised implicitly when they bought into Summit Creek Evelyn Hayes wasn't present, but her lawyer was. Slick, confident, and armed with meticulously prepared arguments referencing the amended bylaw, Elias contested. The lawyer smoothly framed the chairlift as a vital community enhancement essential for future development and supported by the HOA board. He minimized Elias's concerns as isolated and exaggerated subtly, suggesting Elias was resistant to progress, benefiting the majority. The board members listened impassively. Their questions were few, directed mostly at Evelyn's lawyer, focusing on procedural checks rather than the substance of Elias's complaint. It felt rehearsed, a predetermined outcome playing out. Within 30 minutes, the chairman cleared his throat. "While we appreciate Mr. Thorne's concerns," he stated flatly, avoiding Elias's gaze, "the project appears compliant with the amended HOA bylaws presented, and the board finds insufficient grounds to intervene in internal HOA matters regarding approved community improvements." The gavel fell with a dull thud, sealing the decision. Systemic failure felt absolute. Defeated and simmering with a sense of profound injustice, Elias drove back up the mountain. The hope he'd carried down had evaporated, replaced by cold anger. As he neared his property, the sound hit him first, the growl of heavy machinery, the percussive clang of metal on rock. Just beyond his aspen grove, crews were already clearing ground, preparing footings for the first support tower. The noise was jarring, invasive. He found Clara inside curtains, drawn hands pressed against her temples, the familiar lines of pain etched deeper around her eyes. The construction noise was more than an annoyance. It was a direct assault on the sanctuary she needed to heal. Helplessness washed over Elias quickly, hardening into resolve. The system wouldn't help. He was on his own. Winter had clamped down hard on Summit Creek, burying the landscape under a thick blanket of snow. But the silence Elias and Clara had cherished was gone, replaced by the intermittent whine and clank of the nearly completed chairlift, undergoing testing. Support towers, stark metal skeletons against the white backdrop, now marched across the slope, one planted uncomfortably close to their property line. From their living room window, they could see empty chairs gliding past, a constant unsettling reminder of the violation of their sanctuary. One crisp afternoon, as Elias was splitting firewood, the familiar sound of Evelyn Hayes' SUV crunched on the snow-packed driveway. She emerged dressed in expensive ski attire, looking as if she'd just stepped off a magazine cover, a stark contrast to Elias's flannel shirt and work-worn jeans. Behind her, high on the slope, a chair carrying two figures, strangers, swung slowly past their faces, briefly turning towards the cabin. "Elias," Evelyn called out, striding towards him with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. "Good timing. We're doing some final system checks before the grand opening next week. I thought we should discuss the finishing touches regarding your property line." Elias set down his axe, crossing his arms, the cold air doing little to cool his simmering anger. "There's nothing to discuss, Evelyn. This monstrosity shouldn't be here." She gestured dismissively towards the lift structure. "Oh, come now. It's already here and it's going to transform this community, bring valuable winter recreation access." "It's transformed my home into a fishbowl," Elias countered, his voice low and tight. "People will be looking directly into our windows, into our lives." "Progress always has minor inconveniences," Evelyn interrupted smoothly, pulling a manila envelope from her jacket pocket. "But the board understands the proximity and has approved an attractive compensation package to address your concerns." She extended the envelope. "Complimentary lifetime lift passes for you and Clara, significant landscaping credits to perhaps plant some screening trees next spring, and a very generous adjustment to your annual HOA fees." Elias didn't touch the envelope. "I don't want compensation. Evelyn, I want my privacy back. I want the peace we came here for." Her smile finally vanished, replaced by a brittle hardness. "That's no longer an option. The decision is final. The lift opens next Saturday. Above them, another chair creaked past. "Look," she continued, her tone shifting, becoming sharper. "Summit Creek is evolving. This development is key to its future prosperity. Those who can't adapt." She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the icy air. "Should perhaps consider whether this community still suits their needs?" The threat was unmistakable: get on board or get out. This raw display of HOA power abuse struck Elias to the core. "This conversation is over," Evelyn declared, turning to leave. "I suggest you use the compensation to invest in some decent curtains." As her SUV pulled away, Elias stood frozen, the axe forgotten in the snowbank. He looked towards the cabin where he could see Clara's silhouette in the window watching. He saw the slump in her shoulders, the visible manifestation of the stress and man this ordeal was inflicting. That sight, coupled with Evelyn's callous dismissal and threat, broke something within him. The frustration, the helplessness, the anger, it all coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. Conventional means had failed, the system was rigged, fine. He wouldn't play by their rules anymore. He would use the skills he'd honed over a lifetime, the tools gathering dust in his workshop. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. His fight for their threatened privacy was just beginning. The workshop became Elias's sanctuary and laboratory, filled with the familiar scent of solderwood dust and aging electronics. But the work he undertook now was vastly different from restoring vintage amplifiers. This was acoustic engineering, repurposed for psychological warfare. Night after night, fueled by coffee and a cold fury, Elias immersed himself in his most challenging project, composing chaos. First came the analysis, using highly sensitive microphones positioned discreetly near the lift line under the cover of darkness. He recorded hours of the chairlift's normal operating sounds: the rumble of the bull wheel, the rhythmic click of chairs passing towers, the ambient whine of the motor. Back in the workshop, he meticulously broke down these recordings on his computer, analyzing frequencies, identifying signature acoustic patterns. He needed to understand the baseline reality before he could effectively corrupt it. Then, drawing upon decades of experience in sound design, he began building the layers. This wasn't about volume, it was about insidious suggestion, sounds designed to prey on subconscious fears. He started with low-level metal fatigue, subtle high-frequency creaks and pings that hinted at stress just below the surface. He layered in the unsettling groan of stressed steel sourced from sound effect libraries he'd meticulously curated over his career, tweaking the pitch and resonance to blend seamlessly with the lift's actual sounds. Progressive bearing failure effects were added, a barely perceptible grinding that would subtly intensify, designed to be felt as much as heard. Finally, he incorporated the sharp, terrifying crack of fracturing metal, or ice sounds, known to trigger primal fear responses. The key was precision. He invested in specialized directional speakers, capable of projecting sound within a narrow, targeted corridor. His plan wasn't to blanket the mountainside, but to create an unnerving acoustic anomaly, audible only to passengers directly overhead, his property completely undetectable from the ground or the loading stations. He spent days calibrating angles, testing throw distances within the workshop, ensuring the sound dissipated rapidly outside the target zone. To avoid detection and habituation, he programmed complex randomization algorithms using a dedicated mini-computer. The unsettling sounds would never occur in the same sequence or intensity twice. Sometimes the lift might pass with only a faint, unnerving groan. Other times, a sudden sharp crack might coincide with a gust of wind, amplified by the natural environment. He even experimented with subaudible frequencies, sounds below the range of human hearing, known to induce feelings of unease and instability. A subtle psychological effect. There was a moment late one night, surrounded by circuit boards and wiring diagrams, when Elias paused. He looked at a photograph of Clara smiling in her garden from the previous summer. Was this right, intentionally terrifying people, potentially causing panic high above the ground? The moral ambiguity gnawed at him. What if someone got hurt? But then the image of Evelyn Hayes's dismissive smile, the memory of Clara's pain-etched face as the construction noise barraged their home, flooded back. They had left him no choice. They had fired the first shot, invading his sanctuary, threatening his wife's well-being. This wasn't vandalism, it was defense, a precisely engineered response to an unacceptable aggression. With renewed resolve, he began the final phase, weatherproofing and camouflage. He encased the speakers and their associated electronics in rugged, waterproof housings, Some were disguised as ordinary landscape rocks, molded from fiberglass and painted with painstaking realism. Others were integrated into rustic birdhouses mounted discreetly on trees near his property line. Each unit was positioned for optimal acoustic effect and maximum concealment. By the time the first heavy snows of the official ski season began to fall, Elias Thorne's invisible sonic artillery was in place, silent and waiting. The grand opening of the Summit Creek Express chairlift unfolded with calculated fanfare. A crisp blue banner fluttered at the base station. Local dignitaries posed for photos, and Evelyn Hayes, beaming in a designer ski suit, delivered effusive remarks about progress and prosperity. Complimentary hot cider warmed chilled hands as the first eager skiers and residents lined up, buzzing with excitement about the new access to pristine powder fields. From his cabin deck, partially obscured by snow-laden pines, Elias Thorne watched the proceedings with a detached calm, the distant sounds of celebration barely registering. Over the quiet hum of his own anticipation, Clara stood beside him for a moment, her hand resting briefly on his arm, before retreating into the warmth of the house, unable to watch. Elias let the first 2 rotations of chairs ascend without incident. He watched the smiling faces, the carefree waves, the palpable sense of novelty and excitement. Let them experience the normal ride, he thought. Let the contrast, when it came, be all the more jarring. As the third wave of chairs began their journey upward, carrying peak enthusiasm, Elias reached into the weatherproof control box concealed near his woodpile and activated the first sequence, the subtle high-frequency pings of simulated metal fatigue. Midway across his property line, high above the snow-covered ground, the first affected riders subtly shifted. A young couple laughing, moments before, fell silent. The man frowned, tilting his head as if trying to catch a faint, troubling sound. Further back, a veteran skier instinctively tightened his grip on the safety bar, his easy posture stiffening. Conversations faltered, replaced by strained listening. As the 4th rotation entered the targeted zone, Elias introduced the low, groaning undertone of stressed steel. The effect was immediate and more pronounced. One woman pointed urgently towards the nearest support tower, her eyes wide with alarm, saying something unheard to her companion, who now scanned the cables overhead with visible concern. Panic began to bloom like frost on glass. Riders arriving at the upper terminal were visibly shaken, demanding to speak to operators about strange noises and unnerving vibrations they'd experienced over that specific section. Maintenance crews were radioed, dispatched to inspect the towers near Elias's property, but their initial visual checks revealed nothing amiss. The 5th rotation brought the moment Elias had engineered. On one chair sat Martin Cole, a semi-retired structural engineer from Denver, visiting his daughter's family. As his chair passed directly over Elias's workshop, the randomized sequence unleashed a particularly chilling combination, a rising high-pitched whine followed by a sharp, sickening crack that seemed to shudder through the very structure. Cole, whose career involved diagnosing potential failures in bridges and buildings, reacted instantly. "That sounded like catastrophic bearing failure," he yelled to the other passengers on his chair, his face grim. Without hesitation, he reached for the emergency stop lever. The entire lift system lurched to an abrupt halt, leaving dozens of chairs dangling motionless, high above the slopes. 27 passengers were suspended, confusion quickly turning to fear. As minutes stretched on, down at the base, the festive atmosphere evaporated instantly. Evelyn Hayes's polished smile froze, then contorted into a mask of barely controlled fury. She barked orders into a radio, her voice sharp-edged publicly, assuring the growing crowd it was likely a minor sensor issue, while privately demanding answers from her frantic staff. The ensuing evacuation was a slow, arduous, and highly visible operational failure, requiring ski patrol to perform technical rope rescues, chair by chair. It took over 2 grueling hours. As the last passengers were lowered safely to the ground, shaken but unharmed, Evelyn spotted Elias standing stoically on his distant deck. Her eyes narrowed. Slits of fury could have melted steel. Her grand opening, her triumphant moment had dissolved into a logistical nightmare and a public relations disaster, all under the shadow of his quiet cabin. The lift malfunction investigation had begun, but Elias knew they would find nothing. His composition had hit its first dissonant chord perfectly, following extensive overnight inspections that yielded absolutely no mechanical faults. The Summit Creek Express reopened the next day. Under a cloud of unease, Evelyn Hayes issued a statement, blaming a hypersensitive sensor and assuring the public of the lift's complete safety, but the damage was done. Word of the opening day chaos, particularly the structural engineer's alarming assessment and the harrowing evacuation, spread quickly through the tight-knit mountain communities. Elias, monitoring the situation carefully, adjusted his tactics. He didn't deploy the sounds constantly. That would create a pattern. Instead, he operated sporadically, sometimes letting the lift run normally for hours, lulling riders into a false sense of security. Then, seemingly at random, he'd unleash a new unsettling sequence. A sharp groan synchronized with a heavy wind gust, a series of rapid clicks suggesting failing gears, or the low vibrational hum designed to induce unease. The unpredictability became part of the psychological manipulation. No one knew if their ride would be smooth or terrifying. The real accelerant came from social media. A visiting teenager, genuinely terrified by a sudden metallic screeching sound overhead as she passed Elias's property, captured her wide-eyed reaction on her phone. Her shaky TikTok video captioned, "Scariest lift ride ever at Summit Creek. Haunted chairlift." Summit Creek Spectre garnered tens of thousands of views within 48 hours. Skiing forums lit up with threads debating the mysterious noises, sharing secondhand accounts, and warning others away from the cursed section of the lift line. The viral sensation cemented the lift's negative reputation. The impact was swift and severe. Ridership plummeted. Locals began opting for older, longer routes to access terrain, avoiding the express lift altogether. Potential visitors, reading the online buzz, chose other resorts. The projected revenue Evelyn had banked on evaporated. Emergency maintenance checks triggered by panicked rider reports via the emergency phone on the chairs became almost daily occurrences. Each check required a full shutdown, further disrupting operations and costing the HOA dearly in staff time and lost ticket sales, yet consistently finding no identifiable mechanical cause. The lift wasn't just malfunctioning, it was becoming known as the haunted chairlift of Summit Creek. A specter hanging over Evelyn Hayes' ambitious plans. Evelyn, though maintaining a defiant public front, grew increasingly agitated in private, snapping at staff and demanding answers no one could provide. The invisible weapon Elias had forged was hitting its financial and psychological targets with devastating precision. Evelyn Hayes, her patience worn thin and facing mounting pressure from concerned investors linked to her husband's firm, spared no expense. She hired Alpine Engineering Solutions, a top firm specializing in lift technology. For 3 intense days, their team swarmed the Summit Creek Express, testing every component: grips, cables, bearings, replacing several. As a precaution, drive systems, safety circuits, they installed vibration sensors along the problematic section. Their conclusion: the lift was mechanically sound, exceeding safety standards. Expert analysis yielded nothing. Next came the acoustic specialists. Armed with parabolic microphones and spectrum analyzers, they spent days recording ambient sound along the entire lift line, searching for peculiar wind effects, structure-borne resonance, or any unusual sound phenomena. They compared noise profiles during different weather conditions. Their report echoed the engineers' nothing. Acoustically abnormal could be detected that would explain the reported experiences. Frustrated and increasingly suspicious of sabotage, Evelyn ordered heightened security. Patrols on snowmobiles began making regular sweeps along the lift line, paying particular attention to the area bordering Elias Thorne's property. Discrete cameras were mounted on several towers, their lenses pointing towards the woods. A small heated guard booth even appeared near the edge of Elias's land, staffed during operating hours. One raw, blustery evening under the cover of falling snow and the lift's shutdown whine, Elias was performing a routine check on one of his disguised speaker rocks near the aspen grove. He needed to ensure the weatherproof seal hadn't been compromised by the freeze-thaw cycles. Crouched low, working quickly with numb fingers, he suddenly heard the approaching growl of a snowmobile engine cutting through the wind. Headlights sliced through the swirling flakes, coming directly towards his position. Panic flared. He scrambled back, kicking snow over the partially exposed wiring, and dove behind a thick pine trunk just as the patrol swept past the beam, momentarily illuminating the disturbed snow where he'd just been. His heart hammered against his ribs. He fumbled for the small remote in his pocket, sending a command to temporarily disable that entire speaker cluster, praying the brief signal wasn't detectable. The patrol didn't stop. It was a close call, a stark reminder of the risks he was taking. Later that night, unseen by anyone, Evelyn stood alone in the dark, silent base lodge, staring up at the map of the lift line on the wall. Her usually composed face was tight with strain. She picked up her phone, her voice low but sharp. "Find something," she hissed into the receiver. "I don't care what it costs. This entire project, my reputation, it's turning into a joke. Fix it." She slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the empty space, revealing a crack in her armor of confident control. The invisible adversary was clearly taking its toll. The financial bleeding couldn't be ignored. The constant shutdowns, exorbitant expert consultations, tripled insurance premiums classified as high risk, and dismal ticket sales had ravaged the HOA's budget and eaten into reserve funds, cornered Evelyn Hayes and her compliant board, announced a substantial special assessment levied on all homeowners, vaguely citing unexpected operational and maintenance requirements for the Summit Creek Express. The carefully worded letter downplayed the lift's troubled reputation, framing the costs as necessary investments in community infrastructure. The assessment landed like a bombshell, sparking immediate outrage. Homeowners already wary after witnessing the repeated shutdowns and hearing the persistent rumors felt blindsided. Whispers turned into angry phone calls and email chains. Why were they suddenly footing a massive bill for a project that was supposed to increase property values, but seemed only to be generating bad press and operational headaches? The HOA finances suddenly became everyone's business. Fueled by frustration and the mounting pressure, Evelyn decided on a direct approach. One crisp Sunday morning, as Elias enjoyed a rare moment of quiet coffee on his deck, her SUV pulled up sharply. She marched onto his property, flanked this time by two stony-faced board members, her expression a mixture of anger and forced composure. "Thorne," she began without preamble, dispensing with pleasantries. "We know what you're doing. Your background in sound effects isn't exactly a secret around here." Elias met her gaze steadily, maintaining an air of polite confusion. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Evelyn." "Don't play dumb," she snapped, her voice rising. "These mysterious noises, the ones only heard when the chairs pass over your property, it's sabotage, plain and simple, malicious interference." Elias took a slow sip of his coffee. "Coincidence is a funny thing," he replied evenly. "Your own expensive experts, the engineers and acousticians, found nothing wrong, no tampering, no unusual sounds they could pinpoint. Are you suggesting they missed something? Or perhaps," he added, letting the question hang, "the issue lies with the lift itself, despite their findings." Her face flushed with anger. She clearly had no proof, only suspicion and desperation. "This childish behavior won't change anything. The lift stays," she spat. Realizing she had no leverage, she turned abruptly. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers about damages." Watching them retreat, Elias felt a grim satisfaction mixed with unease. Her direct accusation, though, baseless, signaled her desperation, but her bigger mistake was the assessment. It had galvanized the previously passive residents. The upcoming emergency meeting called to discuss the assessment promised to be packed, not just with concerned homeowners, but with angry ones demanding answers. Evelyn might not be able to provide. Her attempt to shore up her finances had inadvertently ignited a community backlash. The community lodge hall buzzed with an angry energy Elias hadn't witnessed before. Every seat was taken, and residents stood packed along the walls, their faces grim. The special assessment notice had acted like a lit match tossed onto dry tinder. Evelyn Hayes stood at the front podium, flanked by her increasingly uncomfortable-looking board members, attempting to maintain control over the simmering crowd. She tried to steer the discussion towards the necessity of the funds, framing the lift's issues as unforeseen challenges common in major projects, but the residents weren't buying it. "Unforeseen," shouted a vacation homeowner from the back. "We've seen it shut down almost daily. My rental bookings are down 30% because people are calling this the death trap lift. Now you want us to pay for your disaster." Murmurs of angry agreement rippled through the room. Voices rose, demanding transparency, questioning the initial budget, asking why the promised increase in property value seemed like a fantasy, while their HOA fees were skyrocketing. Evelyn banged her gavel, calling for order, but the mood was rapidly slipping from her grasp. It was then that Marcus Bellwether calmly rose from his seat near the front. The room gradually quieted as the respected retired judge made his way to the podium. He waited patiently until a semblance of order returned his quiet authority, commanding attention more effectively than Evelyn's gavel. "Madam President, fellow homeowners," Marcus began, his voice measured and clear, carrying easily through the tense silence. "Like many of you, I was deeply concerned by the recent special assessment and the ongoing issues surrounding the Summit Creek Express. Given my background, I felt it was my civic duty to review the available HOA financial records and project documentation. He paused, adjusting his glasses, holding up a sheaf of papers. What I found, he continued, his tone remaining calm but firm, is deeply troubling. He proceeded to lay out his findings with meticulous, irrefutable clarity. First, he stated, the total expenditure on the Chairlift project to date exceeds $2 million, nearly double the $650,000 budget initially presented to the community, with significant cost overruns, never properly approved by a homeowner. Vote as required by our bylaws for capital expenditures exceeding $250,000. A collective gasp went through the room. Second, Marcus went on, I found evidence of multiple no-bid contracts awarded for construction and consultation services, totaling over $400,000, primarily to companies with documented connections to board members or their immediate families. He named specific firms, including one linked directly to Evelyn's husband. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. Third, he pressed on, a review of county records suggests that certain regulatory approvals, including crucial environmental impact statements and final safety certifications, appear to have been expedited or bypassed through procedural irregularities, potentially leveraging personal connections within county offices. He cited specific dates and permit numbers. This project, presented as a boon, was pushed through without proper diligence, transparency, or adherence to our own governing rules, incurring massive debt and potentially compromising safety protocols. The room exploded. Stunned silence gave way to shouts of outrage. People were on their feet, demanding Evelyn's resignation, calling for a full audit, expressing fury at the financial mismanagement and blatant abuse of power. Evelyn, her face pale and drawn, banged the gavel, futilely attempting to declare Marcus out of order, but her voice was lost in the uproar. A longtime resident, Arthur Jenkins, finally managed to make himself heard above the din. Based on Judge Bellwether's findings, he declared, his voice ringing with indignation. I believe this board has fundamentally violated our trust. Therefore, I formally move for a vote of no confidence in President Evelyn Hayes and the current HOA board. The motion was immediately seconded by multiple voices, sealing the fate of Evelyn's reign over Summit Creek. The community, once fragmented, had become a unified force demanding accountability. The motion for a vote of no confidence hung in the air, instantly seconded by a dozen angry voices. The chaotic energy in the lodge coalesced into a determined purpose. Despite Evelyn Hayes's frantic attempts to adjourn the meeting or rule the motion out of order, the homeowners wouldn't be denied. Ballots were quickly improvised on slips of paper, collected in a hat, and counted openly at the front of the room, under the watchful eyes of several residents. The result was swift and decisive. The tally was overwhelmingly in favor of removing Evelyn and her entire board. A wave of relieved applause swept through the hall as the final count was announced. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of disbelief turning into icy fury. Without another word, she gathered her belongings and swept out of the lodge, the remaining board members trailing awkwardly in her wake. Leaving behind the wreckage of her ambition, the HOA leadership crisis had reached its climax. The regime had fallen. In the ensuing quiet, all eyes turned to Marcus Bellwether. Arthur Jenkins, who had made the initial motion, stepped forward again. Judge Bellwether, he said, his voice resonating with respect, given your diligence and integrity in bringing these matters to light, we ask if you would be willing to serve as interim president to guide us through this crisis and restore order and transparency to our HOA. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. Marcus surveyed the hopeful faces, sighed deeply, and nodded his assent. I will serve, he stated, simply accepting the heavy responsibility thrust upon him. Just days later, official notices arrived from both the county planning department and the state regulatory board responsible for lift safety, citing formal complaints filed by Summit Creek homeowners. Complaints bolstered significantly by the detailed evidence Marcus had uncovered regarding procedural irregularities and potential safety certification issues. The agencies jointly issued an immediate suspension of the Summit Creek Express Chairlift's operating permit, pending a comprehensive safety review and financial audit. The timing couldn't have been worse, effectively shutting down the lift for the foreseeable future. For Evelyn Hayes, wherever she was, it was the final undeniable confirmation of her total defeat. The power shift in Summit Creek was complete. A week after the tumultuous HOA meeting, as a fragile quiet settled back over Summit Creek, Elias saw Marcus Bellwether's familiar car pull into his driveway. Elias met him on the porch, offering a simple nod. Marcus looked tired but resolute, the weight of his new role evident. "Elias," Marcus began, getting straight to the point after accepting a cup of coffee. "The lift permit is suspended indefinitely. The state requires significant reviews before they'll even consider recertification, assuming we can sort out the financial mess Evelyn left behind." He paused, swirling the coffee in his mug. "It's quite a situation." He looked out towards the silent, motionless chairlift structure. "Funny thing, though," Marcus continued, his gaze thoughtful, rather than accusatory. "Since the day of that meeting and the subsequent suspension, absolute silence. No more panicked reports, no more strange noises emanating from that specific section over your property. The acoustic anomalies, as the experts called them, seemed to have vanished as quickly as they appeared." He met Elias's eyes directly, a shrewd understanding passing between them. "No one could ever find a technical reason for those sounds. Elias, not the engineers, not the sound specialists, almost as if they weren't inherent to the lift itself." Elias remained quiet, his expression unreadable, waiting. "The new board," Marcus went on, "is facing a difficult choice. We have a multi-million-dollar investment, sitting idle, draining reserves even while shut down. Removing it entirely means writing off a fortune the HOA simply doesn't have. Rerouting it, creating a path that respects property lines and privacy, would cost significantly less, perhaps $400,000, but still requires finding funds and crucially requires confidence that the lift can operate reliably." He leaned forward slightly. "Elias, we need a solution where the lift becomes usable again, generates some revenue to recoup losses, and allows the community to heal. If," he chose his words carefully, "if these anomalies were to permanently cease completely and forever, then the board would have the justification it needs to pursue funding for a modified route, a route that gives homeowners like you the peace you deserve." It wasn't an accusation, but an offer. A pragmatic path forward. Elias considered the silent lift towers, then looked towards the window where Clara was tending to an indoor plant humming softly. "Marcus," Elias replied finally, his voice calm, "I've always supported responsible community development that respects boundaries and the right to privacy." He held the judge's gaze. "A modified route well away from homes sounds like a responsible solution." Marcus nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his lips. The unspoken agreement was sealed. No confessions were needed, no proof demanded, just a shared understanding and a commitment to restoring balance to Summit Creek. True to Marcus Bellwether's word, the interim HOA board presented a phased renovation plan to the Summit Creek homeowners. Just 2 weeks later, Phase 1 involved modifying the existing chairlift, rerouting its path significantly away from residential properties, creating a scenic bypass that curved respectfully around homes, maintaining a minimum distance exceeding 200 feet from any structure. The plan presented with full financial transparency regarding costs and funding strategies, including pursuing damages from Evelyn Hayes and associated parties, was met with cautious optimism and ultimately approved by the community. And just as suddenly and inexplicably as they had begun, the mysterious sounds plaguing the Summit Creek Express ceased entirely. Subsequent maintenance checks and preliminary tests conducted under the strict supervision of state regulators reported no unusual acoustic phenomena whatsoever. The haunted chairlift fell silent, allowing the meticulous process of regulatory review and the complex task of securing funding for the reroute to proceed unimpeded. Construction on the new path began after the spring thaw, carefully planned to minimize disruption. The following winter painted Summit Creek in familiar hues of white and blue, but the atmosphere was distinctly different. The rerouted Summit Creek Express now glided silently along its new trajectory, offering skiers breathtaking vistas without infringing on anyone's privacy and peace. Ridership, though initially slow, began to climb steadily as confidence returned, fueled by positive reviews, praising the scenic route and the lift's smooth, quiet operation. The specter had vanished, replaced by the gentle rhythm of a well-run ski lift, enhancing the community's appeal as originally intended, but now done responsibly. The restoration of harmony was most evident at Elias and Clara's cabin. Clara's garden, meticulously tended throughout the summer, had produced a vibrant bounty, and her health had improved remarkably with the return of tranquility. The chronic pain eased, her energy returned, and the light in her eyes shone brighter than it had in years. Their home was once again the sanctuary they had sought, filled with quiet contentment and the subtle sounds of nature, not intrusive machinery. Evelyn Hayes and her closest allies, facing potential legal action and community ostracism, had long since sold their properties and departed Summit Creek Estates, leaving behind only the memory of turmoil. Sometimes, standing on his deck with a warm mug of coffee, Elias would watch the distant chairs carrying skiers along the new route. He felt no malice, only a quiet sense of vindication. It had taken extreme measures, leveraging a lifetime of specialized knowledge to stand against unchecked poor and protect what mattered most. He never spoke of his role, not even to Marcus, content to let the haunted chairlift fade into local legend. The only tangible remnant of his acoustic campaign was a single weatherproof speaker, still perfectly disguised as a landscape rock near his property line, now permanently dormant. He'd dismantled the rest of the system meticulously. He never expected to need it again, sleeping better, knowing their peace was secure. But it remained there, a silent memento, a quiet reminder tucked away in their restored sanctuary. A reminder, perhaps, echoing an old sentiment. Trust is good, but sometimes preparation is better. The journey to peace had been arduous, but they had arrived. This compelling story reveals powerful life lessons applicable far beyond Summit Creek. Firstly, actively protect your peace and boundaries. Your well-being and personal sanctuary are invaluable and worth defending, even when challenged by seemingly overwhelming forces. Don't wait for permission to safeguard what matters most. Secondly, when conventional methods fail to address injustice or protect your rights, leverage your unique skills and experiences creatively. Elias used his sound expertise. Identify your distinct talents and consider unconventional ways they can be applied to solve problems or challenge unfair situations. Thirdly, the narrative shows that integrity and transparency ultimately build stronger foundations than manipulation and arrogance. While Evelyn's power seemed absolute, it crumbled under scrutiny because it lacked genuine respect for the community. Conversely, Marcus's principled stand united people. Finally, collective action and principled leadership hold immense power. Don't underestimate the impact of a community coming together, or the influence one person with integrity can have in galvanizing change. Embrace your strengths, stand firm on your principles, and know that even complex challenges can be navigated with courage and ingenuity.